Hello everybody, welcome back to the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast, reflecting on more opening day disappointment for the Canaries. The upside is it wasn't as bad as last year's defeat at Oxford. The downside is it was a defeat and it wasn't the start that Liam Manning and the Canaries wanted to the 2025-26 campaign. I'm Connor Southwell, I'm joined by Paddy, Davitt and Seaman. Post that Carrow Road game to reflect on everything that happened, everything that didn't happen from a Norwich City perspective as well. Pad, I think going into the stadium today, and to be fair, you felt it before kickoff. There were flags, there was noise, there was energy from the stands. Opening 25 minutes was quite good. Thereafter, it just became a little bit disjointed for a very new look Norwich City side, didn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. Alex Neil, obviously formerly of the parish, easy to be magnanimous in victory, I guess, but he referenced that atmosphere. He said, look, I've been a manager here. I know what this place is like when it's rocking. And he said that was rocking. That almost pushed his players back a little bit in that first quarter of the game. And there's no doubt Norwich did start the better, aided by, there's that real, I think he even used the word electricity that he felt was inside the stadium. So, fair play to those fans. They heeded Liam's pretty much call to arms, as it were, and did their part. And yeah, okay, wasn't huge amounts of chances created in that opening quarter, but Norwich were on the front foot. There was some good movement, I thought, from the likes of Forson and Cernachin and around Sargent, who had support critically, in contrast to maybe how the game developed thereafter. The defenders had pushed up, they condensed the play, everything was looking good. I liked the Topic and Wright, the early signs of that as a central midfield pairing of promise. But, we've just passed the 10-year anniversary of that Alex Neil green and yellow train that careered all the way to Wembley and that memorable playoff triumph. And that team was, roll your sleeves up, we'll fight you, we'd love a battle. The Bradley Johnsons as well, that era I'm thinking of. And that very much is the DNA that's in this Millwall team. We saw it, sadly, for Johannes Torup's tenure back towards the back end of last season, that Easter game that did for Johannes. And we saw it again today because, again, as Alex Neil said post-match, that grit, that ability to dig in and then find a way. We saw that again from one of his teams, and because I thought from probably the midway point of the first half onwards, they were the dominant actor, really, albeit, the manner of the winner was sourced in, Norwich getting turned over and then some real poor decision-making from some of the new players, as to be said, in that back line. So Liam Manning, conversely, his post-match used the word and looked visibly frustrated that almost had contributed to their own downfall. Their mistakes were punished by a very well-drilled Millwall team, a championship-hardened Millwall team. But we all knew that going into this game, and it's proven to be the case, really, that one team looked further along in their journey under a head coach who's had time to work with that group and now had a transfer window to add and supplement to it. And we had another head coach who really, this was his first outing today of any meaningful note, beyond the pre-season. And then, sadly, after about 25 minutes, it looked like that. It looked like a major work in progress. It looked like, as you said, disjointed. And that's a little bit disappointing, really. The second half, especially for me, with the ball, defensively, suspect. But with the ball, they didn't really create anything. Sargent, increasingly an isolated figure. That will be my frustration watching that unfold today, is that having got themselves in a nice position, comfortable, on the front foot, partly maybe through their own failings as a new team coming together and learning a little bit on the job, but also Millwall and what they did to counteract that bright start from Norwich and then really metaphorically put the foot on the throat and didn't let go, really. And as Alex Neil rightly said, it was 2-1. They missed some glorious other chances as well, particularly the one the lad skied over when the ball was cut back about 6 yards out. How he's missed the target, I do not know. So it could have been an even more uncomfortable opening day. So maybe a little bit of a reality check when the dust settles. As Liam Manning said, they weren't good enough today, but they will get better the longer he has to work with this group of players.
Yeah, and just very quickly to come back to you, because obviously we did, just to interject and change the mood slightly, but we obviously did our predictions podcast, which you were away for, which we managed to get a pretty decent replacement in you and Roberts. I think we all went with top six, which looks like a brilliant prediction one game in, as these things ever do. And look, we know what happened today won't define anything. What would you have said? Has that changed now?
Well, on that front, I hear you were very, very unhappy that I wasn't in any position to give. I must confess, I'm on a family holiday. If you think I'm interrupting that to give my prediction that nobody cares about anyway, but I only know that because I was collared by the Norwich's head of comms pre-match.
He's done a bit of stir in there.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't do that, surely. But so I actually said in response to him, well, I'm quite happy to say I think they'll finish 5th. That looks a little bit foolish now in light of that 90 minutes, but marathon, not a sprint. Let's see. I mean, you threw a killer stat in. Maybe you don't want to put that. I'm forcing you to put it out there now about Liam Manning and his slowish starts at previous postings. And so in that context, maybe it's par for the course. But like you boys, if you all said top 6, I'm of the same opinion. It's just going to be a little bit haphazard in terms of the progress and the trajectory to get to there. But as you're about to tell us, we've been there before with Liam Manning.
Who doesn't like the scenic route? It's more of a journey that way, isn't it? As we know. Well, that is the case. I think I did a very quick search post-game. I haven't looked at all of his jobs. I think the general consensus is that he's a little bit of a slow starter, a little bit of a slow burner as a coach. His teams get better as the seasons go on. I've only been able to sort of check one at this stage. I'll try and do a little bit more of that for the Six Wings piece on Monday. But his Bristol City team last year, we know how it ended with the playoffs. You can argue about what happened once they got there, but they got into the top 6, and that started despite them only winning one of their opening 5 games. And within that run contains 2 back-to-back 3-0 defeats to Derby and Blackburn. Blackburn, who were pretty close to the playoffs by the end. Derby, of course, who very much weren't, and obviously had to be saved by John Eustace. So that's where his Bristol City team started, and clearly they did get significantly better. And Sam, again, I think it's easy, isn't it? It's such a small sample size, one game. It will be the only thing in the flesh that a lot of those fans at Carrow Road have seen today. They've seen the waves of signings. They've seen Liam Manning arrive. There's been all this optimism, all this positivity, and it's easy for that bubble to get burst pretty quickly. But equally, that is also what it is. A lot of new players. I spoke to Jacob Wright post-game and sort of spoke to him about Topic in particular, and he said, well, I had 2 or 3 training sessions, so I don't know yet if that signing is going to be one that really frees me up to go and be an attacking player. And that's the case throughout the whole team. There's new relationships, new formation, new way of playing. People don't like to hear it, but all of that stuff does take time.
Yeah, and that's probably the problem with the whole opening day hype and setup with, everyone marks the calendar basically as soon as the last season ends, and everything is counting down to that. And that's kind of the problem, is that if it goes wrong, it's first of all, it's, as you said, the only sample size you've really got of the team in a competitive environment, and also it's the huge event that you've been building up to for weeks and months. And I think that's why it feels so disappointing when a team performs poorly on the opening day. But as you said, there are a lot of reasons why it's going to take time. I think Topic is probably a good example, but there probably are also things that I was surprised by based on what we saw in pre-season. I think some of the themes that it felt like would carry into the Championship season just didn't. You look at the defensive solidity for particularly in the second half of that pre-season, and Breda, Den Haag, I thought they were very solid in those games. And then just to concede 2 really poor goals like they did today, I don't think I ever would have expected that. So there are some things that I would say they have had enough time to work on, and they just let themselves down today. But certainly there are elements in there. Topic is a good example. You had, when Manning wanted to use his substitutes as, things to make an impact and give him a boost late on. You had Matthias Kvistgaarden coming on with, I think, about 20 minutes of experience in a match with these players. Before, you had a few players on that bench where maybe you didn't really know where they were. You've got others who haven't even made the matchday squad, as a result of their situation. So I think it probably is a little bit early, but there are a couple of problems there, and that's that some of the things actually look like they had been solved in pre-season, and also that we know Norwich maybe have shorter-term expectations this season. I think if it was last season and it had started like that, which obviously it did, as you referenced, with the Oxford defeat, then maybe you could look at it with that wider lens. But when we consider the fact that Norwich really want to be in and around that playoff mix and hopefully promoted this season. They obviously don't have loads of time. They don't have 10 or 15 games to really find their rhythm and get to their best. So I think that's something that probably we have to consider. But ultimately it's game 1 out of 46. It is a long season. It won't decide anything. And as you said, there probably is a lot of mitigation. Although because of the way that externally and internally the opening day is built up in football, I can understand why everyone's so disappointed by it.
It's to use a boxing analogy, isn't it? It's the you spend 6 weeks sparring, and then it's can you handle the first punch in the face? And when that comes, it can be a real awakener for people. And again, on top of that, it is players experiencing Carrow Road for the first time, the Championship for the first time. I think Jakov Medic, not to single him out, because Vladan Kovacevic, I think we could mention as well for the final goal, probably not helped by a lot of what happened ahead of it. There was just a lot of stuff. Jeffrey Schlupp looked rusty, I felt, and I thought Norwich generally, Pad, looked quite leggy as that game wore on. And we've spoken a lot. We know Liam Manning wasn't best pleased with the pre-season schedule. Is that the element that probably the two major elements for me? One of being that, and then we'll come on to the second in a moment. But is that one element that feels quite frustrating? That just how much I guess their physical levels seem to drop off in that second half.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you're benchmarking against the Millwall team, who that is their stock in trade. Alex Neil will be the first to admit, maybe technically, maybe in terms of individual quality, they don't have those reserves with comparison to a lot of the sort of top half of the Championship. But what they compensate for is that cohesive team unit. They effectively know what the game plan is. They stay in their lane. All the players buy into it. You can see that. And just that aggressive pressing almost was what started to tilt it back towards them. So it's hard, again, small sample size. So, you wouldn't want to sort of extrapolate from that have they done enough in terms of the fitness side of it, because it did look like they ran out of steam collectively and individually. But, you're probably comparison there is one of the better teams in the division for those traits. So it's probably not representative in that respect. But same to you, there was Alex Neil when the fixtures came out in the summer. He did a little bit with TalkSport and talked around the fixtures, but also he was asked about his approach to pre-season, and he kind of said, well, he's still a bit old school in terms of he just runs the players. He said to counterbalance that, he does like to get the balls out as soon as possible and get the players enjoying what they're doing. But there's no substitute for sheer hard graft, and almost to the point of wanting to throw up type of going back 15, 20 years. Now, I'm not passing judgment on whether that's the way to go and whether Norwich haven't done enough of that, because, as I say, one game I don't think is enough. But to the untrained eye, let's put it that way, it looked like Millwall did play, or were able to maintain that intensity a lot longer into today's game than Norwich were collectively, individually, and that probably wearing down process is what tipped the balance in their favour. I mean, at 1-1, they score first early into the second half. Norwich very sluggish in that 5, 6, 7 minute period after half time, got punished. Josh Sargent gets them back in the game with his willingness to close down. A few minutes later, at that point, you think that the psychology of it, it's Norwich who are then back on the front foot, crowd are up, Millwall are going to have it tough. Not a bit of it. The 10 or 15 minutes immediately after the equaliser, it was all Millwall again. And, Kovacevic found it very uncomfortable as the ball's rained in underneath his crossbar. And I think on that evidence, you'd like to see him command his area a little bit more moving forward. But that shouldn't have been the case. You would have thought that it would have been Norwich who had been in the ascendant. And again, at the heart of that was that just that they were able to maintain those peak physical levels. And again, that comes back to 4 or 5 debutants was there in that Norwich lineup. Within that, a lot of players experiencing the Championship and all it has to offer for the first time, and it will be, albeit a rude awakening, but it will be an introduction to them. The physicality that's required and the tempo they have to play at in this division. It is, if you're coming particularly from maybe a cross Europe league, I'm sure in most cases I can't think of any other league that's comparable in terms of the physical demands and the intensity. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of learning on the job in these first few weeks for a lot of those players, because what we saw today is the challenge they will face moving forward. And again, it's all about trying to, and again, Liam Manning made the point, Sam's touched on it as well, it's accelerating that adaptation process now. Short-circuiting if they can, cutting corners if they can, to get to that point where their quality will come through then and they can start to be consistent in terms of picking up results, not we get to, I don't know, heaven forbid, October, international break, and you're still at this adaptation phase. I think if we get to that point, then clearly that short-circuiting hasn't happened. So that's the challenge now moving forward. They've had an experience of it today, not a good one in many respects. They need to bank it, learn from it, and, when the next championship game comes along, which is Portsmouth away, if you think Fratton Park on a lunchtime is going to be any less intense, then think again. In very quick order, beyond Watford, obviously in the League Cup midweek, they're going to get challenged again physically to play at that tempo, that intensity, and they need to be better at sustaining it much more than what we got today, 20, 25 minutes. That's nowhere near good enough to get results in the championship.
Yeah, agreed. And I think if there are two teams probably when you're a little bit undercooked and when you're still feeling your way into the season, I think it probably is Alex Neil's Millwall and then probably John Mousinho's Portsmouth. They will be, as we saw on Good Friday, how well coached, how effective, how efficient they are as well. I think you mentioned trends from pre-season and maybe the defensive stuff not coming through. I think one that maybe did, and I certainly made this point in Holland, chance creation, particularly in open play throughout pre-season, wasn't high level. I would say they weren't creating loads and loads of chances and forcing loads and loads of saves. And you look at that game today, I'm not sure. Score a very fortuitous goal, thanks to Josh Sargent's endeavour more than anything else. Beyond that, I'm not sure that Stephen Bender's had a save to make for 90 minutes. I'm not really sure Millwall's defence was put under intense pressure beyond Norwich getting in relatively decent crossing positions, and I think Topic had a shot that was blocked in the first half as well. Minus a couple of free kicks and the set play element of it, it felt a little bit short from a chance creation perspective today, and that will be frustrating for those fans who, obviously at Carrow Road, expect more than that.
Yeah, I mean, they got into quite good sort of attacking territory, I thought, early on. In that first sort of 20, 25 minutes, they really dominated games, and I found it quite ironic how in the first game without Johannes, the first game in this next season without Johannes of Torup, they were able to do something that he spoke about wanting to do for the whole of the season, and they never really achieved that ability to properly keep an opposition penned in and to dominate. I mean, they had all of their outfield players in the Millwall half at one point. So I thought in that sense they set the ground for sort of creativity and chance creation quite well. And in fact, they actually got in a couple of positions where you thought maybe they should do a little bit better. I think Amankwah Forson a couple of times maybe had shots when it wasn't the best option, and he was a little bit crowded out. So I did think they got into the final third and they created those situations where maybe with a little bit more quality they could have done something. But I think there were probably problems with individuals today and also with that connectivity, in terms of the new players and getting used to each other that maybe we didn't see. I think when you've played together for 40 games, if someone gets the ball on the edge of the box and they've got two options, they know which movement someone's going to make and which movement the other player is going to make. And I think there was also a level of, I don't know if this is a word, but franticness about how they did things, because there was that fever-pitched atmosphere at Carrow Road, which I thought definitely helped them generally, but it felt almost like when they got the ball in a good position in the final third, like they were almost too excited and they didn't really have that clinical cold edge when they got in those positions to really make the most of it. So there are probably a few signs that make you think, okay, it's not the end of the world. They could be creating chances relatively soon, but I do think it comes down to that element of getting everyone used to each other and creating those those relationships on the pitch. I mean, some of those players have been together for a year and they still don't really know how each other work, especially in new positions. Amankwah Forson, for example, obviously barely played any games really last season, so he doesn't know how to link with Ante Sienats or Josh Sargent in those positions. I think probably Sienats had a pretty poor game individually as well. I think he could have been much more involved. So I think there are plenty of factors going into it. I don't think we can just say based on today they won't be able to create chances, for the next 10, 15 games. But as you said, when you look at it as a theme across this game and across pre-season, it does feel a little bit worrying, and maybe that's justified because of the defensive struggles last season. I think Manning's been very clear, and it's been clear with the transfer business as well, that they've looked at the numbers last season, they've looked at where things went wrong, and they've seen what the clear priority should be. But ultimately, as we've spoken about time and again over the last few weeks, balance is the really important thing, and I think they haven't quite struck that balance yet between defence and attack.
And that's I think the key word that Sam used there, Paddy, certainly from an attacking perspective, is connectivity. You think about, how you, as Sam said there, and I'd agree completely in terms of how you link up with players from an attacking perspective. It is that understanding of, okay, when I get the ball in this position, is Josh Sargent on the shoulder of the defender? Is he dropping deeper? Do I need to put the ball in X, Y, Z place? And actually, we keep using the word time, and a bigger sample of games, a bigger time together on the training pitch to create those connections, and that's probably true of every single aspect of their game, particularly when you put that attacking element in focus.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously picking through the bones of a defeat on the opening day, and there's inevitably a degree of disappointment and frustration, to go back to what Liam Manning said, but. You take a step back, and it is probably unrealistic to think that you're going to get this fluid, seamless performance. Your anecdote there, Jacob Wright, after the game, he's had 2 training sessions with Mirko Topic. They then pitched into a central midfield against the Millwall team and club, who were very close to getting in the top 6 themselves last season.
And as well, quite a similar 11. I think Alfie Dougherty, I'm sure there were a couple of other new ones, but particularly that midfield partnership. I mean, Billy Mitchell's played loads of games for Mill. Dinora as well was there last season. So that's a well-established midfield unit, just to look at it in that isolation, but more generally across the team. Exactly,
and maybe that is why it was a 20-25 minute spell at the start that you could hang your hat on from a Norwich perspective and say, well, okay, that's what it could look like. And now with the benefit of more training time, and not just those two, but even Forson and Cernach, we didn't see those two paired in that position off Sargent at any point last season. That's a getting to know you process, and as we often said, pre-season largely is irrelevant beyond really building fitness minutes and starting those connections. But it's in terms of preparation for a championship game, it's I think you need to keep it in context, really. So that element, as if we're dissecting it in terms of what they didn't do midfield and onwards, there's clearly a lot of mitigation in that process. And I thought, to hang on to a positive, when Physicality did come on, I mean, he looked a live wire. I mean, his first act, I think, was to go near post, try and get on the end of a Sargent cross. Took a painful whack from the keeper, it looked like. But he did inject some dynamism. He did look like a player comfortable in those areas in the penalty box. And, I think clearly, given, the scale of deal that they put together to bring him in, he is going to be a regular starter in very short order. So even that element that, we're looking at players in certain positions who started that game today, I don't necessarily think, as we bed this season in, that starting lineup in terms of midfield and attacking areas will look quite as it was today. So, it's really, I guess we just have to bear in mind this is all part of a process, and Liam has alluded to it a lot during pre-season. He's almost reprogramming a lot of the players from the demands that Johannes and Glenn and Jack Wiltshire latterly placed on them. He wants different things from those players, and obviously you then overlay the ones they brought in, and that process, which has to be delicately balanced and blended. And so you pull all the strands together, and you get a disjointed performance against a very well-drilled Millwall, who they know their jobs, and they've got a head coach who knows what it takes to get results in this division, and has proven now he can build sides that are very hard to beat, and top 10 and upwards material. So you pull all that together, I think, yes, frustration and disappointment, but I think you have to look at the bigger picture now, and just hope, as Liam Manning is clearly of a mind, that he and his coaching staff are able to find ways to ease that evolution and accelerate that process. And that's what you have to cling to, I guess, if you're a Norwich fan, because that optimism that was palpable and that excitement, that electricity at the start of the game today, I don't think it'd take too much in terms of a nice little run of consistent results, ideally a few wins in this first maybe 10 block of games, for that to really take hold. And, we've all seen, if you can get this club going, what it can do in this division, most notably with Alex Neil that period. So, yeah, it's I guess everything we're discussing today is just reaffirming that this is a process, and new head coaching staff around him by and large, and a huge turnover of players. And I mean, you saw the ones who were either on the bench today, wasn't in the squad either through choice, and we'll get into that I'm sure in due course, or just injured. There's so many variables at the moment. I don't think you need to overplay the fact that they've lost the opening game today against a very settled Millwall team.
Yes, and again, even within those elements, Sam, as Paddy said there, it's not, we're not talking about them being completely outplayed. We've spoken about the section in the first half. I thought even the second half of the first half where Millwall came into the game a bit more, but it was just a real scrap fest. It wasn't, Millwall suddenly found a higher gear and off they went and they surged to victory. They had to work their way into that game. So we're not talking about a Norwich team maybe as we were last season, that when there was a bit of adversity just kind of completely fell apart. It didn't do that. It probably just was a team that wasn't quite able to reach the levels that are very, as Paddy said, efficient, effective, a Mills over a lot of continuity was able to do.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at those periods, obviously they did bounce back pretty well after that first goal, and yes, the goal was quite fortunate with a little bit of Sargent hard.
Goal of the season
work.
Contender, what do you think?
Well, it is so far.
Yeah,
it's the best one so far. But yeah, so they showed a bit of resilience there, and then the fact that they seemed to want to go again after they scored that goal, I thought was an encouraging sign, and probably there was that mental fortitude, but. Yeah, I think it was more just the technical and tactical elements of the game that really exposed them, particularly late on. I think if you look at those elements, Millwall score in the 83rd minute, and then are there many worse circumstances than a team that doesn't really know each other that well, has a few substitutes in there. I mean, Javon Makama was making his first appearance for the club. He was just sort of thrown into the Championship for the first time in his career as well. So a team that maybe doesn't know each other that well, having to create a chance with 12 minutes against another team that knows each other really, really well, is well drilled. And if you just go route one and you don't try to do those sort of complex, you don't try to build the ball up in a complex way and try to create chances in that fashion. If you do just go route one, then that plays into Millwall's hands even more. So I did think it was more of a technical and tactical problem, and a problem with the moment that Norwich found themselves in when they conceded that goal, and ultimately it was technical and tactical problems that got them in trouble with those two goals. So yeah, I didn't see many themes, to be honest, from today that we saw from last season. I think there were a lot of struggles. It's hard to say that it was loads better than the large majority of what we saw last season, but I still felt like it looked like a different team. I wasn't sat there going, why did they sack Yannis Torup? This is exactly the same. I think they did things in quite a different way. Tactically, you can see them doing things in a very different way, and there was that variety that Manning has sort of promised and that we've spoken about a lot. But ultimately, Millwall were just better than them. They didn't do all of those things that they're now trying to do. Even if they're different to what they were trying to do before, they just didn't do them well enough. And that was ultimately where the problem was. So I wasn't looking at it going, this is exactly the same team. I was just looking at it going, this is a worse placed team to take points from this game than Millwall were. Sometimes, especially at this stage of a new season with a new head coach and loads of new signings, that's just the situation that you're in.
Absolutely. Paddy, to end this sort of half and to end this segment, footnote in the game, I think for the reasons we've discussed, it wasn't the reason why Norwich lost the game, but Jake Cooper was a very lucky boy. It's quite impressive, I think, to almost commit 3 yellow card offences in a single game and only get one.
Well, yeah, and I put that point to Liam, thinking that he might want to dead bat it, and we don't hide behind excuses. It wasn't good enough, and no, he more or less concurred that he shouldn't have been on the pitch. May not have had any material bearing on the game, but you'd think against 10, that surely would have tipped it back towards Norwich.
I mean, the first one's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah,
How is that not a yellow card?
I mean, it's a prolonged shirt pull on Sargent, as well as he spins him just inside the Millwall half and heads to go down the channel. And if he's not seen it, the referee, then his assistant's on that side as well. So, and then he obviously later in that half does get a yellow for a tangle with Medic that clearly the referee did see, because he only brandished one yellow card to one of the participants there. So it's too early in the season to get into the officiating, surely. But Liam Manning was in no doubt that he should not have been on the pitch, and within what we've discussed was a very tight, even affair, few real clear-cut chances, Millwall shading the ones that was created. Then those are the elements that can, and Alex Neil actually, now I think of it, did talk in more general terms about in the Championship, it's fine margins, and in a game like that, maybe Millwall going down to 10 is one of those that could tilt it the other way, but wasn't to be. And I'll be interested to see where that official ends up next week. Because some of his game management, I thought, left a lot to be desired. Yeah.
I don't know. Having watched the opening game with Birmingham and Ipswich, wouldn't surprise me if he got a better game next week. To be completely honest, that's the way these things seem to work. So, yeah, I mean, I can kind of forgive the third one because that was a little bit off the ball, and I think Cooper sort of lent into Sargent and whatnot. So I can understand that one, but the first one, it's classic kind of, I don't want to give a yellow card 5 minutes into the start of the season, but if it's a yellow card, right? So, yeah, utterly bizarre. But as we said, for all maybe the Mill fans, if they've lasted 31 minutes of this, and maybe they haven't, that's not the reason Norwich lost the game. Mill were by far the better team. That's probably it for part one. Part two, we'll speak Josh Sargent. We'll speak lots of players maybe who weren't in the squad today as well. So we'll see you for that in just a second. Welcome back to the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast, part two, after Norwich City's defeat to Millwall on the opening day of the 25-26 campaign. I'm joined by Samuel Seaman and Paddy Davitt at PinkUn Towers to reflect on that one. I guess, Sam, probably to bookend the game, really, what did you make in terms of Norwich City's shape and the three at the back? Because I think it's always one of those formations that feels quite polarising, because I think by nature you're playing three centre-backs, there are two wing-backs, it can become a five quite easily out of possession. It can feel quite negative at points, and that's not always the way. I think you can play really attacking with a back three as well. And as we know, these things are very fluid. Last year they played with a back four a lot, but it became a back three when they were building up, and all those different elements. We know all of those things. I did feel today, and again with all of the mitigation layered over it that we added in the first part about where they're at as a group, lots of new players, new manager. This was only the third game really that we've seen Norwich play a back three as well. So they're not going to be polished. They aren't going to be that Bristol City team that ended last season that was able to get a lot of results playing that way. But it used the word balance in the first part. It just didn't quite feel like they got that balance right in terms of the wing backs, in terms of the positionings, and that maybe was documented for that third goal, where if you play a back three and you don't quite get the positions right, it leaves a lot of space for kind of pace to get in between your wing back and your centre back, which is exactly how that second goal was sourced.
Well, that's it, and that's probably why you want to have a slightly pacier centre back in that that wide role. I think Cordoba probably gives you that on the left-hand side, and although I know his game is kind of imperfect and he looks like he's a little bit low on confidence at times, I thought he was okay today. But I think he gives you a different type of option in that back three to Darling and Medic, who I think in some ways are quite similar. I don't see Medic as a sort of natural outside option because of that pace. I don't think he's extremely slow, but he did clearly get outpaced for that second goal, and it's probably not a strength of his game. So yeah, that can be where it causes problems. I think for me, the main difference I saw in that back five today to what we saw against Breda, when it was probably at his best, if you look at those three games that Manning's used it, was that it became a back five more often than a back four, because actually against Breda, the way that they set up a lot of the time, it was one of the wing backs. So if the ball's on the Norwich right, Jack Stacey would push really high and press, and then Diallo would tuck in as a left back, and they would be a back four. And vice versa, if the ball's on the Norwich left, Diallo would push up, Jack Stacey would become a right back. And I didn't really see that, I don't think, at any point today. It just looked like when Norwich didn't have possession, they were sat in a back five, and that ultimately takes one player away from your high press. It means there are fewer options available high up the pitch when you win the ball. And And there were so many times when, you know, we were saying to each other in the press box. I could hear a lot of fans saying to each other as well at the time that there just weren't any options going forward. And actually, that was a theme I picked up when I spoke to people outside the ground as well. Was that they just didn't feel like when Norwich had the ball, they were particularly good at getting it to Josh Sargent, and I think that was because there weren't enough links between that back five, which to me today looked like a back five rather than a back three. They didn't have those options to get up to Sargent, and I think that was where a lot of the attacking problems came from. So, yeah, I think that's something for Manning to look into. I wonder if part of it is just the player selection that he went for. Obviously, against Breda, it was Papa Amadou Diallo in that left wing position, and certainly you'd say that he was far more of a left winger than a left back. Then you got Jeffrey Schlupp in there today, who I know probably at his best was a left winger. But at this stage of his career, and you look at where he's played previously at Celtic, last season he was played, I think, purely as a left back. He is certainly more of that full-back defender bracket than he is a winger at this stage of his career. So he's obviously not going to be naturally inclined to press immediately, as Diallo I'm sure was. I'm sure Diallo was playing for the first time as an attacker, and he was desperate to get into those positions as often as possible. So I don't think they had that proactivity, whether that's the personnel, as I just mentioned, or if it's the opposition and Millwall just playing well and pinning them back, or if it's the occasion and maybe those players going, okay, if I press and it's not the right time, then I'm leaving the defenders exposed. I'm sure there are a variety of factors, but I thought for a few reasons, although they've proven that the back three can work at times, they just let it become a back five too often rather than it being a back four or a back three when they wanted to get bodies up the pitch, either when they were pressing or when they had the ball.
Yes, and I guess, Paddy, in many ways this kind of segues into a chat about Josh Sargent, because there were points in the second half where you could see it. There was the goalkeeper, there was the three, there was the two wing backs, there was the two midfielders, there was a big gap, mostly filled by Millwall players. Then there was Sargent, Sienats and Forson. It was too big in terms of the position, and often that meant Norwich going direct. It meant probably Millwall centre-backs, particularly Cooper, Tanganga as well, having exactly the game they wanted: tussle, arm wrestle, physical battle. That's very difficult, even with someone of Josh Sargent's stature as well. And it probably just became the game that Mill wanted, and that's probably where Alex Neil deserves a lot of credit for just the way he tweaked it in the second half to up that. But again, equally, it led to Josh Sargent feeding on. I'm not even sure we can describe it as scraps. Really, it was probably less than scraps is.
Yeah, he just got deeper and deeper. I mean, there was one moment there where he took a ball from Medic. He's going back towards goal. He's in his own half, and he's had to almost spin out from two or three players and then feed it. I think it was to Schlupp on the left hand side, and he's in his own half. There was another, I think it was an attacking play for Millwall, and he's burst out of his own defence and carried the ball however many yards, and then shoveled it on to Cernach, and they win a corner. And that's not where you want him. That's not where he's going to be at his most effective. That far away.
In the second half as well, wasn't there, where he'd come to the right side and he had the ball looking at sort of the box. At who's in there, and it's like, well, it should be you, Josh, mate. And
it was him who put that ball in. I mentioned earlier for Quistgarden as well. They're not the areas of the pitch where, by common consent, put your green and yellow glasses away. He is the best of his type in this division. Put it in the pointers today. I mean, it's 4. I think Adam tweeted this morning. It was like 4 years to the day that he actually signed, and I looked in it. I think it was off the top of my head now 44 prior to today. 44 league goals in 98 championship appearances in a team and a club that's really treaded water effectively these past 2 seasons when he's produced that productivity. He is a difference maker, and to see him having to forage on those scraps. Probably did illustrate, how disjointed they were with the ball and how maybe lacking in that structure, that imagination, that physicality, that intensity. All those elements contributed to a game that doesn't suit him, doesn't suit Norwich either, particularly at Carrow Road as well, where you'd want them to be far more proactive. And as they were in that first 20, 25 minutes, in contrast, he has Cernach, he has Forson in and around him in the box. Stacey, when he was putting balls in, there was multiple yellow shirts in and around that penalty area, and that's how you get the most out of him. And as Liam Manning said, that goal really just owed everything to nothing more than his appetite and his desire for work and his commitment to go and close down the keeper and to broaden it out. I mean, he basically said that he typifies that culture that he's trying to build within this club now, within that dressing room, and almost felt a little bit sorry that he ended up on the losing side because, he alone. I mean, take him out of that equation, it would have been even more desperate in terms of what they didn't offer as an attacking unit. And I know you're probably going to get on now to 3 weeks left of the window and what the future holds for him, but
that predictable?
No, not at all. No, but it's the logical next one, and the fear is you take him out of the equation. As proactive as they've been in this transfer window, that is a major hole to fill, which we knew anyway. But I mean, it just underlined it again today that even in a team that is structurally not quite there and disjointed, you still have a chance at this level with him in your side, and take him out of the side, and it's a whole different ball game. So, yeah, but that's a long-winded way of saying, they definitely did not get the most out of him when he has to play that far away from the opposition penalty area.
This system, particularly from an attacking perspective, lives and dies by its wing backs. If you don't get that balance right, you don't get if they don't get their positions right in possession, the midfield isn't set, you don't have the link to the front three, it all kind of falls apart. And I think probably Schlupp, as we said 2 weeks ago, didn't have a club, was training alone. It's difficult to go from that to fast tracking and being dropped into the Championship straight away. Obviously, Cresene working his way up from what was quite a long injury layoff as well. So again, there's lots of mitigation as to why that was the case. But there were times in the first half where I think Topic and Wright had the ball and they turned out to the left, and it was just a little bit too flat. He wasn't high enough in his position, and if you start there, it's difficult to then progress. And I think as the game wore on, as Paddy said, it just opened up them gaps. There became more space, and that's where it becomes difficult for Josh Sargent. And I probably am going to be predictable, Sam, because but I'll take it down a slightly different angle, which is, as Pad said, there's 3 weeks left. He's just highlighted, Liam Manning has highlighted, Jacob Wright after the game highlighted it as well, just how important a figure he is. Does there come a stage in this transfer window whereby Norwich have to pull the drawbridge up? It becomes too late for them to go out? Because if it was last month, it's not ideal losing Josh Sargent at any point, but it gives you a lot of time then to build. I'm sure they've done lots of work in the background. I'm sure they'd have players ready to go. But for how detrimental it would be to their overall cause at this stage of the Championship campaign, is there a point where that drawbridge has to come up, or does the money talk and does the money get to a point where it becomes too big for that drawbridge to come up?
I just think the way that they have talked about him, this summer, it does feel like probably if the drawbridge does come up, it's going to be really, really late in the window. I think I'd be surprised if they were rejecting bids in the next couple of weeks, because it's too late for them to to prepare and to get used to it. But I thought today did really bring into quite stark reality how much they will struggle without him if he goes, and how big of a figure he is to that team, because there were times he was playing like Roy of the Rovers. He was literally so that example that Paddy raised of him literally picking the ball up 30 yards out, 35 yards out, and driving all the way up to the edge of the box. You kind of watched it. It was a bit like in Sunday League when there's this
under. Do you know what I was going to say? I was going to like when you're at school and you're like in low level high school and you played like a load of year 10s or 11s, and one of the year 10s and 11s just physically were bigger and stronger and.
It's like that, but part of me feels like even compared to his own peers, he's kind of. It's like that sort of age, and one of the kids has somehow grown up to 6 foot. When you're 12, and they just charge around, sort of running the game. It did feel a little bit like that at times, and you kind of watched it and you thought, first of all, from his perspective, what must he be thinking as he has to literally go and sprint up to the goalkeeper and block a clearance to be able to get on the score sheet and to be able to have any chance of getting on the score sheet. But then also to Norwich, if you didn't have him doing that, it was a close game today in which they were the worst team. So imagine if they didn't have him. I thought it did really, really bring into, it's quite clear how big a problem it would be if he left. And I wonder if that's had much of an impact on Ben Napper and how he views things. I'm sure, as you said, they will have looked at many targets. We know that they've looked at many targets and many potential people to bring in case he does go. But for me, it's impossible for a Championship club to to attract somebody as good as Josh Sargent. I think whoever Norwich brought in, the best signing they could possibly make for me wouldn't be 70% as good as Josh Sargent. So that is something definitely for them to weigh up. But also, I suppose you have to look at things as sort of a wider strategy. They've spent a lot of money for a Championship club. This summer, they've done a lot of scouting work on everyone that they've brought in. They've got Matthias Kvistgaarden there, who's played for most of his career as a central striker rather than a wide player. So I suppose if he does go, it's kind of a case of holding your nerve. But to be honest, if I was Napa, and obviously I'm not cut out to be a sporting director, or I would be one, but if I were him, I probably would have been watching that and going, I'm a little bit concerned about the plan now for if he goes. But we know that they're aware of the various elements around him and his fitness and his value, and they feel like maybe now would be a good time to offload him value wise. We know that Sargent is open to a move, even though he didn't feel Wolfsburg was the right one for him. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out, and it will be interesting to see how they address things. But to be honest, if I were them, I maybe would be getting sort of itchy feet as it related to that drawbridge and wondering quite how big an impact it would have on the team. Mainly because of this season's objectives. We know, as I spoke about earlier, we know they want to get promoted this season if they possibly can. And for me, I think it's going to be really, really hard to do that if they do lose Josh Sargent.
On the flip side, Paddy, I am in many ways flabbergasted. I mean, I take the points about his fitness, his international performances. For £20 million, and that's not. It feels crazy saying this really in modern world, but in modern football, that's not a lot of money, particularly for a striker who scores at the rate that he does. I'm flabbergasted that a Premier League club. I know clearly Wolfsburg tried, and it was Sargent who didn't want that move. But I cannot believe someone hasn't come to the table and just even taken a risk on him at this stage, given what he produces in the Championship pretty much week in, week out.
Yeah, it does seem quite strange that, and we know the likes of Burnley and Leeds have looked at him and continue to look at him and may firm up that interest in due course. But you would think, now particularly now the season's underway, I mean that's a bit of a signpost that we're in the home stretch of this current trading cycle, and now I think there will be an uptick. Now I think, having said that,
I've kicked the table there. I apologise.
You've kicked the table, yeah.
I'm stretching my feet out and
at the prospect of Josh Sargent going, yeah.
It's my fury.
It's a trigger reflex, yeah. So, I mean, having said that, the Premier League don't kick off till next weekend, do they? So, do we then see, a real, because then those lower end clubs, to not be disrespectful to sort of two newly promoted clubs, but they will have ambitions just to stay in the division, I'm sure, first and foremost. Does it focus the mind then, particularly, if you don't get off to the start you need as one of those clubs, and you probably realise that you're going to have to do something. So to echo Sam's point, I can see this still being a slow burner for a period of time, and then particularly if in the intervening period, conversely, he follows up, this coming weekend at Portsmouth and the next couple of games, and he gets off to a real good start in terms of goal scoring. That'll just again nudge potential clubs who are out there and feel they need somebody who could weigh in. And of course, there's those questions around his injury record and his fitness. There'll be also those questions about can he do it at the high level, because the reality is he was sort of second fiddle to Teemu Pukki in the Premier League years here that he was involved with. So there's a lot of imponderables, but I think at that figure, certainly, which was where we know it was getting towards with Wolfsburg, and both clubs were seemingly of a similar mind that a deal could be struck. You look at the. I mean, that in Premier League terms is laughably. It's like chicken feed, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't one of those clubs, particularly if they don't get off to the best of starts, feel their hands a little bit forced, and then they do come in, and if that scenario does play out, then it is going to be late in the window, and Norwich will have to deal with it if that presents itself. If you're Ben Napper and that comes in, then the reality was they were seemingly happy to do a deal with Wolfsburg at those levels. If another club, be it Premier League or anywhere else, get to those levels again, then I don't see why Norwich's stance would have changed, irrespective of what happens on the pitch in these first few Championship games. You know, they were set on an alignment that could, see Sargent go this summer. Then that, for me, would still be the case from Norwich's trading position anyway. But yeah, to echo what Sam said, I mean, and not just based on today, I mean, we didn't learn anything we didn't already know about Josh Sargent's influence and leadership within this group. But I think the reality is, I think there's probably more chapters to go in this particular saga this summer, and I'd still, if I had £1 to put down, I'd still have it on him not being a Norwich player beyond the close of this summer transfer window, which, certainly off the back of today, again, underlines Liam Manning has a lot to unpick and a lot to put back together again, and chief among that would be, how do you, off the top of obviously losing Borja Science earlier in the summer, let's not forget 30-plus Championship goals out of last season's side, a side that were mid-table at best. That would be a huge challenge, allowing for the fact that they've done a lot of business already in those more attacking areas, but none of those players, with the greatest respect to them at this stage of their Norwich careers, give you the guarantee that a Josh Sargent would.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, just to pick up on a couple of points there. I mean, if there's any Premier League team that are looking at what he was like in the Premier League last time, I just don't see that as a comparison, because for the reasons you outlined, he's a completely different player now. I mean, Burnley have just spent 20 million on Breuer. He's not a better player than Josh Sargent. I'm pretty convinced of that. It's the fact he played for Chelsea, and that maybe is easier to kind of sell. I mean, we had it with Gabriel Sara. I mean, how didn't Gabriel Sara end up at a Premier League club? It's lazy, I think, in many ways. I'm not trying to sell him, by the way. It sounds like I am. I'd be delighted if that laziness persists, but I'm just, flabbergasted that no one has come out. Obviously, Burnley have had a couple of nibbles at a low level and structured their deals very strangely, but I just, it blows my mind, really. But anyway, that's beside the point. Hopefully my mind continues to be blown deep into September and he's still here. Sam, plenty of players that were at Carrow Road but weren't on the pitch today. Lots of them, we know the size of Norwich's squad. Obviously, Duffy, Slimani, Hills were the ones last week. You can add Emi Marcondes, Rory McConville, who wasn't in the squad, Matej Jurasek as well. I mean, so much of, as everyone will know, his Norwich City story so far has been about frustration and probably bemusement as well. Yeah. The fact we've got to the start of the season and he's not in a matchday squad, and as Liam Manning said, there's no injury issue. He just selection-wise didn't feel he Paddy, you're gonna have to correct me what he said here, but he wasn't ready for selection. Is that kind of what he said, or
that was the inference? Yeah, that certainly wasn't a fitness-related issue. I mean, we saw him doing running drills pre-match. Basically, I mean, Jallow doesn't even get on today. In the squad, but doesn't even get on. So clearly, in Liam Manning's mind, Jurasek is not in his best 20 available options as it stands, and the challenge therefore is for that player to prove day to day, goal to goal, that he is good enough to maybe elbow some of those lads who were on the bench today in the first instance, and then you hope then progress on into the starting 11, because we're talking about this summer's transfer window and the business they did. He was the headline arrival in January, and I think it's safe to say for all parties it hasn't quite gone to plan yet.
Yes, which lends me on to the point I was going to bring you in, Sam, which is, if you're a Norwich fan and heard it plenty today, it's a concern. Where is he? Why is he not in the team? We've spent nearly £6 million on this guy. Clearly there's a cup game on Watford against Watford on Tuesday night. If he's really not involved there, you would truly begin to worry, but it's not a great state of affairs, is it, in terms of him and start to the season and all that. It felt like a bit of a sideshow towards the end of the season. We don't need that. Norwich City don't need that. Liam Manning doesn't need that. The lad himself doesn't need that. It's just not great, is it?
No, and for what it's worth, if I had to guess, I'd say he probably is involved and probably plays a decent amount of minutes against Watford. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's not as troubling a situation maybe as it was last season, because there was just this, this exasperation of how long is this going to go on for. But when you actually boil it down to this being someone who Norwich signed for £5.8 million, 7 months ago? I mean, that is really quite alarming, and especially when the plan, as we know, was for him to work really hard on his fitness over pre-season. We know he had that minor surgery on that hernia issue, but he did spend a lot of his pre-season still working on that fitness and trying to build himself up so that he was ready to go. And although he obviously doesn't have an injury, that's not why he missed out on today's game. It's, to my mind, you look at the talent that he has probably, on a technical level, and it does still feel like, even if we can't call it a fitness issue, it's kind of it's an issue with physicality, isn't it? It's a problem that maybe he needs to work on where he is at the moment. And yeah, I think it's a real concern, and probably also evidence of where sacking head coaches on a regular basis doesn't really work in your favour, because we know Johannes Torp rated him really, really highly. Ben Napper's told the anecdote a few times of how Torp used to go into his office after training and say he was really buzzing about Jurasek and couldn't wait to use him in his team.
It was painted in a bit more of a Shakespearean manner than that. It was, the door flew open and it was, this guy.
Yeah, I apologise for underselling the drama of the situation. You painted it in a much better light. But yeah, it probably shows, from having Torp, who rated him really highly, to then Manning, who now is coming in, and to Manning, he's not a £5.8 million signing who he signed off on, a few months ago and has seen the potential of and really wants to make work. He's somebody who he came in and he was struggling with injury issues, maybe had, some physical things to work on over pre-season, and hasn't done that to the extent that he would have liked. So, while it's justified that he's not in that team, I think it does underscore, how big a disparity there is between what they saw in Jurasek when he arrived, and already after 7 months, how far down the pecking order he is, and how much of a mystery his time at Norwich already is, really. So I think there is probably pressure on him. In fact, there's definitely pressure on him to deliver if he does get a good amount of minutes against Watford. And I think from what I saw of him in pre-season, probably mainly against Northampton, there was that substitute appearance against Olympiacos where I wasn't particularly impressed. But I thought against Northampton he was actually really good, and technically he showed the ability that a lot of people have spoken about. But yeah, to be in this situation now, 7 months after paying such a huge sum of money for that. I mean, you look at Championship context, that is a huge sum of money. It's a pretty poor situation, and something they will be absolutely desperate to turn around as soon as possible, because you can't go splashing £5.8 million on players and not having them at least work out to some degree. I mean, if he scores, I don't know, 5 to 7 goals this season, they end up selling him in 2 years for £4 million. It's probably not a disaster, but to have that amount of money spent on someone who can't make the matchday squad, yeah, it's definitely not a good look.
No, and it's a sign, like you say, of how quickly football moves, right? Because Anis Ben Slimani, Emi Marcondes ended the season really big parts of this team. Could see both going before the end of the window, if we're honest, if the right situation arose. And those are two guys that were very favoured by one manager and not favoured by another. And those are the sands in which football moves. And the challenge he's got now, like you mentioned, is there's a lot of players ahead of him in those attacking positions. Oscar Schwartau was on the bench, didn't see him today as well. Very highly rated young player, Chris Gordon as well, and Diallo, like you say, didn't get on the pitch. There's a lot of players that he's got to leapfrog, and you've got to feel he's got to get it going soon. And who knows, maybe Watford is the moment he does that and he scores a couple of goals. He looks brilliant. He comes in against Portsmouth, the rest is history, and he becomes a Norwich legend. But yeah, at the moment it does feel like something is going to have to give at some point in terms of that situation. Turning our attention to that game, Paddy, because we mentioned maybe where Norwich are at. It's a really interesting one now, that trip to Watford on Tuesday, because you've got a team there, as we said, where they need to build connections, they need to build relationships. But Liam Manning's got a big squad, and we probably expect a lot of those players maybe to be involved. So how does he approach it? Do you go again? And I get, 3-game week, it's going to be difficult at this stage for a lot of the players to get through it. But in an ideal world, if you're him, would you want to go with, if not exactly the same 11, which it won't be, sort of some elements of that 11 just to try and build up some of that chemistry that we spoke about, or will it be a complete change?
It's a tricky one, yeah. I mean, we'll obviously get the chance to speak to him again on Monday, so hopefully that gives us a bit more of an insight. I'm trying to think. I think it's Bristol team. I think they went quite deep into the cup competitions. I've got a vague recollection.
In the FA Cup, didn't they? Played West Ham.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that was televised, wasn't it? Yeah, so I always sort of benchmark it against Farco, and when you're talking about cup competitions, there was a guy who there was some memorable nights under him in the cup. Arsenal away, 8,000-9,000.
You've got the two extremes. You've got Farco, and then you've got Lambert, who just binned them off, really, didn't he? So.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking maybe Smith was probably in that category as well. Yeah, good old Dino.
There's an argument he binned the Championship off, but we won't
go there. Yeah. No, we won't go there. But so we'll see where Liam Manning falls between, because that will dictate ultimately his approach. I mean, is there anything to be gained by playing Sargent at Vicarage Road? Not for me, because he's just too precious a commodity.
Chris Goran?
Certainly give him some exposure, but again, I wouldn't be looking to flog him because in terms of minutes at Vicarage Road, because again, I think he's showed enough for me that he could be pushing for a start against Portsmouth. So if it's me, then no, I'm tipping more towards this next block of games. Portsmouth would dominate my thoughts because it's they cannot afford to start the championship season in losing fashion, because then any momentum is lost, and then questions that we've just had a debate here about Jurasek, those questions grow louder and louder. The new signings who are playing, if they're in part of a losing start to the season, then questions will be asked about that level of recruitment. So you don't need any of that. So for me, it's a massive squad. We did the team news before the game today, and you flip over the back of the matchday programme, and it went all the way down to about 51, I think, the squad numbers, and a lot of names from Kovacevic downwards. So I would be changing up quite considerably, if I'm honest, and that isn't meant in any way to be disrespectful to the League Cup or what have you, but I just think it to me the weighting should be the Championship and getting off to a good start in the Championship. So things like, do you want to go right and top pitch again at Vicarage Road because it might aid their levels of understanding as a pair? No, not for me. No, I think Liam Gibbs is on the bench today, maybe give him some game time. What it might actually do, beyond the competition midweek, it might just crystallise, we've talked about, who wasn't in the squad today. Just crystallise maybe in terms of the Liam Mannings, who might just be on the edge there of, no, he could stay around it and be part of the squad, or no, maybe it tips towards he probably needs to go out. In his case, probably loan posting. It just might make up Liam Manning's mind, and that would be a useful, from a coaching perspective, a useful construct to have, because obviously, there is going to be a competitive edge to that game midweek. Forgive me, lads. How did Watford get on today?
They lost
1-0. Yeah, late winner.
Did they?
Yeah,
at Vicarage Road?
No, at the Valley.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so...
Speak about Shakespearean. I think Nathan Jones would be a good Shakespeare character.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely, yeah. He's got that pathos about him, old Nathan Jones, doesn't he? But, so it's the Jallow derby, this, isn't it, midweek? We'll probably hear a lot about that. So there's a player I'd like to see, actually, thinking about it, start at Watford. Because, again, as I've just said with Liam Gibbs, with somebody like him, he comes in, really has a good positive showing there. He springboards then into your thoughts for Portsmouth, I think. So yeah, for me, no, I think he does shake it up quite considerably. But within that isn't to say that you disregard it as an exercise that could prove quite useful for a lot of these individuals.
Absolutely. That probably brings us to the end of the podcast. Before we go, I think you will have noticed there's 3 of us. Usually there's 4. Transfer windows open. Things happen. Unfortunately, Adam Harvey, who has been for nearly 4 years a major part of our team, a lot of the work he has done, maybe you guys won't have appreciated because he'd been behind the camera often making us clowns look better than we are, and edits these podcasts and puts in a lot of hours making our video output look great. And sadly he's leaving us. He's been fantastic. I think I speak on behalf of all of us to work with over the period, and he's done some fantastic work, and we're very sad to leave him, but that's the nature of the way these things work. And I think he's clearly been a valued member of our team, so I think it's worth us telling you guys as well that he's not going to be on these podcasts before we get into October and you wonder where the hell's he gone, have we locked him in a cupboard or whatnot. But we obviously wish him all the best in what he's going on to do, and I'm sure he'll make a big success of it as well. So that's a nice end for him. Sadly, today was his last game. It's not the best way for anybody to go out, but hopefully the season as a whole will, and I'm sure he'll go back to watching Norwich as a fan and whatnot. Will be much more enjoyable. Thank you very much. Whether you've watched on YouTube, whether you've listened to us, I really appreciate you joining us over the last hour or so. We'll be back, of course, next week after that trip to Fratton Park. Well, hopefully this undercooked Norwich City side will look a little bit more oven ready. See you then.